Thank everybody for joining us today for this conversation about the state of college press freedom as part of College Press Freedom Day 2025. My name is Mike Heaston. I am the senior legal consultant for the Student Press Law Center. Um, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Student Press Law Center, we're a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1974, and our whole reason for being in business is to provide free legal help and information to college journalists, both at the high school and college level. And we pretty much do it on every sort of media topic that comes up. My specific job and that of my colleague, John Falk, is our hotline where you can send us an email or set up a phone call where we can talk about any sort of media law issue that might be coming up. Censorship, though, has always been. I mean, censorship was actually the reason that we were founded 50 years ago. They did a national survey, and they found out that the kind of the number one obstacle to student journalists doing good journalism was censorship. And unfortunately, as we'll hear about today, some of those things haven't completely changed. One of the things, if you don't do anything else, if you're not familiar with us, do just be aware that we do exist for you. So, check out our hotline to find out, what sort of information might be there. But please do, take advantage of talking to either myself or John if anything comes up. So this is the 8th year for Student Press Freedom Day. We organize this each year, and it's an opportunity for us to bring attention to the important role that student journalists play in their communities. It also is a chance to highlight the challenges they face from censorship or otherwise. And we also try and kind of gather and take steps to figure out, what those challenges are to advance kind of the whole idea of student press freedom. We have some tremendous sponsors who make student press freedom possible, and we have to thank them here today for their continued support of student journalists and student media in general. So, in 2025, we did this last year, and it was a very popular session that we had. It was popular because we had way too much content to talk about. There was just a lot going on within the student media world. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that certainly has not changed this year. We have seen, 2025, 2024, 2025 has already been breaking records. We're seeing record numbers of calls come into the hotline. I've been doing this for a little over 3 decades, for I think 36 years. I've been doing this, and it really is. It's a new climate that we're seeing. You guys are facing this, at a time that we need student journalists. I think more than ever. More than ever. Last spring's pro-Palestinians demonstrations were the perfect example. I mean, the nation was glued to the TV, and we were looking at the coverage that you all were providing. You all provided some of the most in-depth, most comprehensive coverage that was out there. I was so proud. I was hearing from you folks every day about some of the reporting challenges that you're having, and I was just so proud of the work that you were doing and the tremendous effort that you were putting in. I mean, 24/7. Sleeping in newsrooms was and eating in newsrooms was a part of what you guys are doing. So it was truly inspiring. It was really a great chance for the whole country, I think, just to see what it is that student journalists do. But the protest brought law enforcement to campus, and we saw several examples of law enforcement violate, press freedom, and show blatant disrespect, really, for the role that students play. And we're going to hear about some of that today. Reporters we found, were assaulted at times by other counter protesters. We had a number of encounters, both we're going to hear about today at Dartmouth, but across the country of involvement with police. Some student news media were locked out of their newsrooms, and so that became an ongoing challenge for folks. According to the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, 21% of the journalists arrested or detained in 2024 were students, and so we're certainly going to hear from Charlotte a little bit later on today about her story there. But of course, challenges didn't start or end with the protests. The anti-protest hostility of the past few years is only intensifying and perhaps emboldening more school administrators to use tight budgets to really crack down on student media in a way that we've seen, had started, probably probably a decade or more ago, but has really seemed to intensify lately. We're going to hear today how some of that's played out at UT Dallas with Gregorio. He's going to tell us a little about his issues there. And of course, those tight budgets and the changing media landscape continue to hit student media very hard, including this semester for the Daily Trojan, who was among a number of student media out there who have seen significant hits to their budgeting and to the way that they're able to report these. None of these challenges to student press freedom are really new, but students in 2025 are and facing them, with increasing regularity. Um, uh, the one thing that we are seeing too is that, even in the face of these daunting challenges, student media are stepping up. I mean, you all have a unique perspective. I mean, like I said, some of the reporting that was coming out during the protest, you didn't see that reporting any other place. But you also, sometimes have the only perspective. One of the things we're seeing too is, student media and more and more communities they are the news source. They are the place that students, not just students, but the community itself has to go to for news. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that too. Um, to lead this conversation, we're very lucky to have Emily Bloch, who is a national reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, where she specializes in covering youth internet culture. She is also the national president of the Society for Professional Journalists. So we are so grateful, so honored to have you with us today. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you all for being here. I am a product of student journalism. I was editor-in-chief of my student newspaper at FAU's University Press, and I made a lot of phone calls to FPLC's hotline, more than I would like to admit. So I'm very grateful for this resource and that they continue to be on the forefront of this sort of work. And I'm happy we could all be here today. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to jump right in, but I figure we could start on a little bit of a lighter note. And I'd love if we could go around the room and if you could each introduce yourselves, the school you attend, your role at the student paper, and let's keep it a little cheeky. I'd love if you could tell me your hot take on your favorite election night pizza topping. The more controversial, the better. And I'm going to start with Charlotte.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Hampton. I'm a junior at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and I'm the managing editor of the D, which is the Dartmouth, which is our daily independent student newspaper. And I'm gonna start as editor-in-chief in a month. And in terms of my favorite election night pizza topping, I'm a big fan of Hawaiian pizza. So yeah, it gets pushback, but I love it. Pineapple and meat, it's delicious.
I love that for you. Respect. Gregorio, your turn.
Sure. My name's Gregorio. I attend the University of Texas at Dallas, and I guess I'm the current editor-in-chief of our new replacement publication after the other one exploded. And I think my favorite kind of like election night topping, um, I'd have to say is something like maybe tears. When you see things going really poorly, I think they add a fun, salty taste to the pizza that you don't really get with the default salt that is already on pizza.
Incredible. All right, Nathan, your turn.
Yeah, my name is Nathan. I'm a junior at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles, California, of course. And I'm the digital managing editor at the Daily Trojan. And I'm going to second Charlotte. I think a good pineapple on pizza is the best opportunity. If that offends you, I think just pretend it's not a pizza and then like let the sweet and savory like combine, and it's just delicious, you know.
All right. Thank you all for being here. A lot of pro pineapple in the chat. Interesting. Gregorio, you talked about before everything exploded, and I think that's a perfect segue to sort of talk about your situation and how the retrograde came to be. So why don't you start us off and talk about sort of your experience over the past year?
Yeah, so last spring on May 1st, I became the editor-in-chief of our UTD student publication that'd been around for over 40 years, The Mercury. And May 1st was also the day that we had student encampments on our campus for the first time, protesting for divestment from 5 weapons manufacturers. We as students went there, we documented everything, saw what was going on, and immediately started publishing breaking news content about that. Once we started publishing breaking news, though, we started to get a lot of pushback from our campus administration. They didn't want us talking about it. They didn't want any sort of spotlight on this whatsoever. And they were denying all of our requests for information, any points of clarification we needed from campus administration when it came to policy or their actions once police arrived to raid that encampment. All of that was just met with a stone wall. We weren't able to get anything out of them. So, as any good journalist does, we filed a public records request against our university. We went out of our way to interview the people who were arrested. We followed them to jail and got the story out of them, even if our campus administration didn't want that. When we published all of that on May 20th in like a big comprehensive issue over everything we were able to find out, they demoted our advisor. After that, they put a university PR person in as our new advisor and director of student media. And she opened her first meeting with us by saying that we were a kind of like malpractice rag that really shouldn't be printing this sort of stuff, which, we're student journalists. We're here to learn. We asked, hey, what was the malpractice here? We'd like to avoid that in the future if we ever do this professionally. And she had no response and instead left the meeting early, which is a cool and normal thing to do when you're the advisor to a student publication and you just said they do malpractice. After that, we had just back and forth fighting with our campus administration for the whole summer. And when the fall semester started, things got even more tense with a new advisor saying that unless we did prior review, we would not be traveling to any conferences like the College Media Association or Associated Collegiate Press events that happen each year. And because we didn't want to do prior review, since that's against our foundational bylaws, I was fired. And then because I was fired, my entire staff went on strike, and then they were all fired as well. And continuing our spiteful trend, we formed our own nonprofit newspaper to continue doing what we were already doing, even if the campus administration didn't want us to do it at all.
You're getting really good at summarizing that because there's a lot to pack in, but I know that you've talked about it a lot. So I appreciate that and much respect. You mentioned to me previously that you assigned that coverage the first day on the job, right?
Yes.
How did you go about that? How did you feel? Was there any sort of doubt in your mind? And like what gave you the conviction to keep pushing through?
Yeah, so I woke up that day a bit later than usual since I'd stayed up on April 31st just doing like a bunch of work to get prepared to be the editor-in-chief, finishing up some other tasks for school because again, we're students and it was like finals week for us. And when I woke up, it was like 9 a.m. and my phone is just like blowing up with messages. And people have just been saying, like, Gregorio, why aren't you here? There's been an encampment since 6 a.m. We should get some coverage of this. And my thing was like, okay, I don't have class today. I'm going to walk over there. I'm going to message all of my staff. And it was a very kind of like begrudging thing, like, okay, we're doing this now. Let's make sure we do some good coverage of it. And it was a very kind of like fun and chill event when we arrived. Students were studying, they were doing like lecture halls with each other because, again, it's finals week. There was free food, which is always appreciated. And it was a really like good environment to be in. And then it got to a point where we published our first article just saying like, hey, here's this encampment. Nothing much is going on. Students are just hanging out. And then I went to class because I was like, oh, okay, it looks like there's not going to be too much going on. I'll just have my photographers and other reporters come in and check periodically, make sure nothing big happens. I am then in my constitutional law class, and I start receiving messages that there are state troopers patrolling campus now, which isn't normal. And then I start getting more messages that they have an armored vehicle hiding behind our student union next to the Chick-fil-A. That's weird. I didn't know the Chick-fil-A needed to be raided by state troopers. And then I get just a deluge of messages of like, there are a bunch of men in full riot gear, over 100 of them, marching towards the student encampment. So at that point, I did leave my class early. I kind of like messaged all of our staff, like something big is going down. We need as many photographers and reporters as possible to make sure we see what happens. And then we just saw like the brutal arrest of all of those protesters and the dispersal of the encampment. And it was just kind of like a very exciting first day. We kind of kept going for 36 hours since we did follow them all the way to jail and stayed the night there since it was just nonstop developments there as well with these specific legal cases of the people arrested.
I want to hear more, but I know that this is such a common theme. I see heads nodding, but also just seeing the coverage locally from other student newspapers. Like, we know that this is something that's not just happening here. Your example just happens to be one where it has been extremely escalated to an egregious level that it's scary to watch, but I feel like you've handled it so impressively. And I've been enjoying following the Retrogrades coverage so far. I know y'all just had your first print edition, so congratulations on that. And I want to take it over to Charlotte because you have also had some rattling experiences covering protests, including one that led to your own arrest. So I would love if you could sort of just walk us through your own experience. And you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, sure. Do you want me to just sort of run you through what happened that night?
Yeah, if you could give us a little summary for people that aren't as familiar.
So Dartmouth took a bit longer to get started with the encampment action than a lot of its peers. You know, we had seen pro-Palestinian activism across the country, and we in the newsroom had been sort of preparing because we knew that something similar was going to come for us. And it happened on May 1st. So this has been going on at Columbia for a few weeks and had already been quite escalated. But on May 1st, there was a huge pro-Palestinian protest, and we had heard talks of people setting up encampments, which the college had made very clear was sort of the red line of when this would sort of be escalated. So I went to the Green, our campus quad, that evening around 3 p.m. and was there for hours as sort of the lead reporter, because I was at the time also the managing editor of the news section. So frantically texting updates to our editors who are in the newsroom in a big building across the street where I am now. And I was there with a photographer whose name was Alessandra, and a friend as well. And over time, things started to escalate. There were state troopers showed up with huge armored vehicles. They had batons and guns. And we were doing these live updates that we're publishing on our website. And we felt sort of safe there because we were among a number of other members of the press. So there were people from the Valley News, which is our local paper, the Boston Globe. We were even there with a member of the Dartmouth communications staff, which is sort of like the kicker, like funny thing. And as Dre was lying down on the ground, videotaping a history professor be thrown to the ground by police officers, they started to arrest her. And I have this distinct memory of this moment of this deciding to like move forward or move back. You know, I kind of had the opportunity then to merge myself into the crowd. But because she was, you know, someone who I had sort of mentored, she was a reporter who I had edited, and also, as I said earlier, a friend, I said, like, don't take her, she's a reporter. And then that's when they took me too, and they zip tied both of us and threw us in a van from the Dartmouth Outing Club, funnily enough, which is the like outdoor hiking club at Dartmouth. So the last time I'd been in one of those vans, I was on the way to a hiking trip or a paddling trip, and took us to the Lebanon County Jail, which is about 15 minutes away. And we were in the jail for about a half an hour before and got our mugshots taken before editors of the paper came and bailed us out. So yeah, that was kind of the whole night, and then we had to deal with getting the charges dropped, etc., which took another while.
The commonality I can't help but notice is I feel like if it weren't for your publications bringing these issues to the forefront of the public and having that level of accountability, things might not be made right or made a little more right than they have been in your cases. How does that make you feel? How do you grapple with that, Charlotte?
What do you mean made right?
Well, I mean, in your case, they didn't pursue charges. Do you feel like they wouldn't have pursued those charges if it hadn't been covered by the Boston Globe and to that level of like publicity?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So yeah, the prosecutor, we were charged with criminal trespassing, and the prosecutor dropped our charges a week later. And I think that I credit the dropping of our charges absolutely to the outpouring of support that came after our arrest. You know, there was a very clear response, especially from free speech groups like SPLC, saying, you know, this isn't right. Student journalists are journalists, and these people shouldn't have been arrested. And PEN America and FIRE and SPLC co-penned this letter calling for our charges to be dropped, and that was definitely effective. And, you know, uh, my editors also wrote a story in the paper, like, within half an hour of us returning to the newsroom calling for our charges to be dropped, that got thousands and thousands of hits and was widely shared. And alumni of the Dartmouth were, you know, wrote a letter calling for our charges to be dropped. So absolutely, the outpouring of support surely contributed to the fact that the college contacted the relevant authorities and had our charges dropped.
Yeah, thanks for that. Nathan, I want to turn it to you. The, examples that we're hearing right now are sort of these like really extreme versions of what's happening in student press across the country, but issues are a spectrum, right? And it's a matter of who, like a paper cannot even come out if it doesn't have funding and support and reader eyeballs, and faculty that can help, mentor students. So I'd love to sort of hear about your experiences at the Daily Trojan and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I want to preface it by saying that I remember when I started at the DT as a freshman 3 years ago, I already knew that the pay for each article is $15, which I think for a lot of student newspapers is already kind of a lot, but it also kind of sets the tone of like, this is a newspaper with not that much funding. But that really came to a head this past year where we found out already, and we wrote about this in a letter from the editor, but like at the beginning of the fall semester, we're hearing that our print schedule hasn't come out yet. Our budget hasn't necessarily been finalized by the university, and like we're tied to the university in that way with funding. And so we know something is bubbling, but nobody is willing to tell us. And we kind of ask just openly, like, hey, we feel like something's going on. What's going on with our budget? What can we do to help? And they said, well, we might have to make some budget cuts, but we'll let you know later. And so kind of we start the fall semester assuming, nothing too terrible is happening, just kind of the same stuff like, oh, journalism doesn't have that much money. We're going to try our best. And so we continue. And then it's only at the end of the fall semester when we start hearing those same concerns come up again. And we think to ourselves, not only in this past semester have we been kind of stonewalled, like we'll ask, hey, how can we help with funding? But those concerns were entertained only up to the point where we could actually implement them. Like, okay, you can look up, ways to like, create merch or like do other opportunities like that. But then we'd start bringing them and they'd say, okay, let's talk to our associate vice president or whoever in admin. And that talk would go nowhere. And so we come out with this letter from the editor at the end of the semester. And it's kind of the one that on our print paper stays on the newsstands for the next couple of days. And that one gets a lot of traction. And we know that even just with our regular print papers, there's a newsstand right in front of the admin office. And so we know they pick these up every day. They see it and they say, okay, we're willing to talk with you. And so I'm in that meeting with our current editor-in-chief. I was digital managing editor at the time. And they say, okay, we're finally going to give you budget transparency. These are some numbers about what your budget is. And yes, in the past, there's been a deficit. There's actually been a deficit for 5 years. And I'm like, okay, that's horrible. What can we do to help? And they say, okay, we'll have a separate meeting to discuss maybe future stuff and also what your next semester is going to look like. Because like I mentioned earlier, they wouldn't tell us, the print schedule or anything like that. We have that next meeting, and that's when the hammer drops that they're cutting print to 3 days a week, that they're cutting staff pay and they're cutting editor pay. And that was not a discussion, that was an announcement basically. And it's just kind of goes to show that they announced it with within the context of there's other budget cuts going on in the university, and they said, this deficit that we were able to cover for the past 5 years is no longer being covered, and it was this very neat narrative. But I think kind of when you pick at it, you see that, okay, for 5 years we asked, what did you do to try and solve this deficit? Silence. Okay, what kind of fundraising opportunities can we do? Okay, well, there's a lot of different things we can explore. And so we kind of see not only in this 5 years kind of a lack of action and, commitment to upholding this 100 plus year legacy of student journalism on our campus, but we also see that this culture of silence has been created where people have been coming up with ideas and trying to ask about the budget for at least my entire time. I remember, for the past 3 years, we've had an opinion article come out saying our staff needs to be paid minimum wage. Not even the editors get paid minimum wage. It comes down to $2 a month maybe, or sorry, $2 an hour. But because there's this culture of silence around how much are you getting paid and how much is the budget, and what large scale changes can we do to make a difference, we've just kind of been left in this position where we were sitting ducks until the administration finally, let's say, found an excuse to cut our budget. And while we've had so many meetings since December, the end of the semester, when we heard this decision to try and raise more money, build up our network, etc. But we're hoping that the administration can be more cooperative. But we have to understand and keep the wider context of this is happening across the country, as we've mentioned, like Gregorio was saying about how, or even earlier how you were mentioning, how a small budget can be used as a tool to manipulate or control your student newspaper. So we know it's in a larger context, and that's something we're always keeping in the back of our mind in these negotiations as we're developing, our processes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. It's super frustrating. And to your point, it's something we're seeing nationwide. I know that besides the Daily Trojan, KU's university, Daily Kansan is also facing budget cut threats. And that's something that we've seen as a trend for, number one, just because media is not necessarily a lucrative field. And that also transposes to the student level, but it's also a silencing tactic. And it is a way to control the narrative and control the media under a university's thumb. So it's incredibly scary and frustrating. How do you grapple with something like that? What is your, I don't want you to tell me the full plan, but what sort of meetings are y'all having about making sure the public is aware of the importance of the Daily Trojan?
Yeah, one thing I can say right off the bat is that when we started publicizing our situation, we had, again, an outpouring of support, which we always really appreciate. When it comes to situations where journalism is being threatened, we had, alumni saying, I'm a lawyer, I'm, this and this experience level, how can I help? And so we're finding that in this time, we really need to be able to build our resilience network of lawyers and, people who are experienced in advertising and other, revenue models. And we've also been meeting with a lot of other student newspapers. We've been meeting with, the Daily Brew and UCLA student paper, the Stanford Daily, Indiana Daily Student, whose kind of letters from the editor and their funding situation also really inspired me personally and inspired a lot of us. And just kind of getting a sense of what other revenue models can we do? What options do we have for asserting more of our independence and our ability as students to control our product? Because while we're generating these articles and things like that, everything that is responsible for like, that generation is out of our control. And so as we like, continue to have these meetings about like what kind of strategies are best, we're also having meetings with administration and with other departments on campus, just getting an understanding of like, how can we modernize, let's say, our advertising model? How can we create different programs that, can give some benefits for high schoolers, but also we can use as a fundraising technique. Like I know, for example, I think Stanford does like a breaking news simulation type of thing. And just other things like that. Just how can we modernize? How can we, let's say, make up for the lost time of the past 5 years of nothing happening?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. This question is sort of for everyone, but I would love to hear more about members of the general public that are watching this today. How are they best able to support you and support student media outlets? Who wants to kick it off? Don't make me call on you.
I guess I could start. One thing that's like really been helpful to us has been just how the general public has received us. When we went on strike, we got over 1,000 kind of like signatures on our strike statement, which really made that more than just a handful of students complaining that they didn't like a campus action. It was now a large part of the student body, faculty, all expressing their disdain for actions that they didn't like, to such an extent they were willing to put their name on like a strike statement. And that was really helpful for us. We've also had a lot of support when it comes to people donating to our nonprofit that helps us print newspapers, which is difficult to do when you have literally no funding and have existed for like a few months. So that kind of support's really been helpful. And then just kind of like being able to go to members of like the press and lawyers who are like either just happy to help or they are alumni of the school has also been really helpful to us because it's like crucial industry expert advice that we're no longer able to get from the university. And the amount we got from the university when it comes to advice is debatable. But like what we're able to get now by reaching out to these people and meeting with them has been so much more than whatever we kind of like received when we were under kind of like the thumb of campus administration. So just like really being out there to help student journalists is a great tool because we're here to learn, we're here to kind of like grow and provide essential coverage of our communities. So it's kind of like this situation in which everything that kind of like gets given into student journalism goes back to the community because now they're able to apply all of those skills and help out platform all of the things going on around them.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I would echo a lot of what Gregorio said. I think on a basic level, just reading the coverage that comes from student papers, as with any form of media, we are sustained by eyeballs. So that's important. And supporting organizations that are advocating for young journalists like the SPLC, I personally was so supported by the SPLC after my arrest. My conversation with Mike about maybe 4 days or 5 days after I was arrested was what let me sleep again at night. So, yeah, I think not only supporting student papers, but also the advocacy groups that are rallying around them.
Yeah, a lot of really good points. I just echo and then add on that the community support is really important. It's obviously a two-way street. Like we have a responsibility to be able to amplify and, shed light on what's going on in our communities. But it's really important, when these petitions go out or at times where things are threatened that people are able to show their support and what things mean for them. After our, December articles and stuff came out, we came out with a petition, now has about 2,400 signatures. It's still linked on our social media. And that was kind of one of the first times where people could literally write or just sign, click, and say, this newspaper is important to me. This daily print paper, which you're threatening, is important to me. And that, at least to our administration, is really what they're looking for, numbers. It just when I was in that room, the biggest thing they said is, we try and argue the angle of, journalism is important, shedding light on whatever the case may be, whether it's, positive community aspects or negative community aspects is important. The thing they respond to more is numbers. And when they see that, maybe there's like a lot of newspapers in the newsstand, or when they see that people aren't really like paying attention to news or don't trust news as much, that kind of sticks with them. But there is a sense, I think, that people, support student journalism, and it's important that we have to remind people that that support exists.
Yeah, those are all great points. I think it's really important that, especially from the perspective of a student or someone who might not be as financially inclined to support, that there are other just as relevant ways to support, whether that's picking up an issue, clicking on a story, engaging on social media, signing a petition, that all show that level of investment. Um, we're coming close on time, but before we go to audience Q&A, I'd like to go to one more question. We've touched on this today already. It's no secret that journalism isn't necessarily a lucrative field. What keeps y'all in this? Why do you stay?
I can go first. I think, well, first there's like the high-minded, the public's right to know answer, right? Which I think is really valid and truthful and is motivating to me. I think that journalism is a really noble profession. And I think that it's ever important because young people have a particularly warped relationship with free and fair information because of our obsession with social media. So I think it's more important than ever that we have good journalists today because of that, and also because of the appearance of news deserts, right? Something I've thought a lot about as someone who now lives in rural New Hampshire is my relationship to doing local coverage and how important that is. That's something I love about the D as opposed to papers like the Columbia Spectator. I grew up on the Upper West Side, which is why I reference the Spectator. No hate to them, they're a great paper, but doing journalism in the city is very different from doing journalism here when you're filling the need for a local paper. And then on a more personal note, I love reading and writing. I love picking up like a print newspaper. There's something I find very romantic about this. So yeah, that's kind of a two-pronged response.
That's great. Thanks. Gregorio?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes for me now, like very different to how I got into it. Like I got into student journalism because I just wanted to kind of like connect to the campus, see what different student groups were doing, and generally just get like a nonstop faucet of gossip. I thought that was like a really good way to get into student journalism, and that's what brought me to it. But since I've been a student journalist covering everything from car crashes to campus covering up huge scandals, it's just become a thing of like putting a spotlight on the truth because constantly we just see this effort from our university administrators to obfuscate and hide what has actually happened or what their intent is because it's not good for their donors or it looks bad for the alumni if this is what their school is doing and it's being open about it. Because no matter what, our school is doing it. It's engaging in these actions which are deleterious to our student body, to our faculty, to our staff. They're engaging in these multi-million-dollar projects with apparently no actual goal in sight. They just kind of like do it because it looks nice to have another huge, gaudy museum. And our computer labs are like falling apart. Our science buildings are in like a state of disrepair. So it's like all of these things are going on. And it makes me ashamed to be at this campus where it's like, yeah, like I'm here. You guys offered me a scholarship. That's great, but you're also doing things that actively go against the pursuit of like knowledge and academia. And you have all of these like lofty goals on your university webpage, but that means nothing if every action you do goes directly against that. And I think as student journalists, we're best positioned to be watchdogs for the universities we attend because we are students at those universities, we're directly impacted by any actions they take. And we're the ones who kind of like most care about it. Like you might have, like we live in Dallas, there are a bunch of papers here who cover things for us, and will occasionally talk about the school, but they don't talk about everything that goes on because for the general public, it might not be as pressing. But for the 30,000 plus people that engage with the campus, the tens of thousands of alumni, people in the local community, the actions the university takes are huge. So having that spotlight's really important so that they don't just act in the shadows and do insane things that are deeply harmful.
Great
Yeah.
response. Thank you. Nathan?
Yeah, adding on to what everyone said so far, USC has a nickname, University of Scandals and Corruption, and it holds true to a certain extent. And there's a lot of interest. I think to Charlotte's point, like we're kind of a big city newspaper. USC is, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest employers or private employers in Los Angeles. So there's already this giant built-in community of, students, faculty, staff, and just alumni that are interested in not only what the football team is doing, but like why were faculty benefits cut? Why are departments getting less funding? Why are students being, manipulated into coming to the university, for example? And so that already creates a very, very important need for, like Gregorio was saying, student journalists who like know their campus and know everything that's going on, know, the professors and staff directly. And so that's always such a pressing like need and responsibility for DT reporters. But also just in general, like it's just the ability to like hear what one or two people are saying and kind of write an article so that they're in direct conversation with the, instruments of power that are bothering them and that are oppressing them, basically. That's a huge motivator, but it's also just seeing all the dedicated work of the different DT reporters. There's so many people I could name. But it's just like, when you see people sleeping in the newsroom and when you see people staying out, whether it's like 6 a.m. or like in the middle of the night, reporting on different aspects of the university, it makes you want to be a better reporter for them and also for your community.
That's a really great response. Thank you all. So we're going to pivot over to audience questions. So I'd like to invite anyone that has some to throw them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can, I promise. We'll kick things off with Katie Baxter has a question. She would like to know what kind of support can advisors provide to students as they navigate this crazy world right now. So if anyone would like to jump in on support advisors can offer.
I guess one thing that advisors should not do, because that's more of where my expertise is they shouldn't kind of like betray their students for the campus administration. Like when you're told to censor student presses, maybe don't do that. That's kind of like a usually a legal thing to do, and it's like antithetical and anathema to the whole concept of student journalism. So like going out of your way to support your students and defend them, because a lot of the time when it comes to like the bureaucratic structure of the university, the advisor's the only one who cares about the student journalists. They're the only kind of like voice there to support them, to get them into those rooms where they can go and like talk to like the vice president of some office to help get more funding. They're the person inside of the university. And I think it's really important that they see themselves as a supporter of the student journalist instead of like just another member of the bureaucracy or just another person here to make sure the paper acts in one particular way, irrespective of what the student wants. So really being kind of like the main supporter of the students is important.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a great answer. I see a question that I guess is sort of for me from Nayeli Carrillo. How do you transition from being a student journalist to joining the professional field? And I guess what I could say to that is everything that I did as a student journalist, well, most of the things I did as a student journalist have sort of just transitioned. I wanted to write about music, so I wrote every clip I possibly could about music on my college campus until I had enough of a portfolio that I could scale up to my local alt weekly. And then from there, I wrote enough for my local alt weekly on the subject that I had enough to scale up and bring it to more national and regional glossy magazines. And by the time I was a senior, I was already writing for Teen Vogue. So it's one of those things where it's muscle memory and you have to write and write and write. Or if you're a photographer, you have to take photos as much as possible because you're not going to get better if you're not practicing. But I think a lot of the tools that I learned along the way in college about interviewing and having empathy and wanting to treat my sources the way I would want to be treated on the other side of the chair have stayed with me the whole time. Like, sure, my writing has maybe gotten a little tighter, I've gotten a little faster, but it's all the same things that I was drilling when I was a student. So I would just, this is a very general question and we could talk about it more one-on-one if you'd like, but from a broad stance, it's chipping away at that muscle memory and keep doing what you're doing because you're not going to get there if you don't have practice under your belt. Any other questions? I'll give it a little grace period and I will maybe add one more question of my own. Can all of y'all tell the audience about one of your favorite stories that either you or your newsroom have worked on this year and why it stands out?
I can go. I mean, favorite's sort of a difficult word here because some of the coverage I've done has been like just really difficult.
That's fair. Maybe most impactful.
Yeah, I think because I wouldn't want to characterize what I'm about to say as any sort of favorite. But 2 summers ago, my friends found online some leaked arrest log at a fraternity with 12 counts of aggravated sexual assault and 2 counts of strangulation. And it turns out it was a Dartmouth alumni who had come back and raped a freshman girl on the roof of his fraternity. And the college had basically swept this under the rug and it wasn't public. And we broke the story my freshman summer because my friends had found this arrest log online. And we've been covering the trial all winter. So I've spent many days the past few weeks driving up to North Haverhill, which is an hour north from campus, to the Grafton County Superior Court covering the trial. And this Dartmouth alum was just found guilty last week when the trial wrapped up. So yeah, that was definitely an example of student journalism being very impactful. Like, this would not have been public. No, probably wouldn't have been covered if not for us finding the arrest log and breaking the story in my freshman summer and then following up on it. So yeah, I think that is a really good example of why student journalism matters and yeah, the importance of the kind of work we do.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Gregorio or Nathan, do you have any stories that kind of stick out? It's okay if you don't. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
There was like one story that was really impactful for me when I was doing all of my kind of like May 1st protest coverage. One of the professors who was arrested, Dr. Ali Alibai, wasn't even at the protest like demonstrating that day. He had been leaving after his graduate lecture on art history, and he was walking back to his car, crossing the plaza where the protesters were set up. And that's when he saw all of the kind of like armored police and riot gear. And he started filming, rushed over, and was just like crying out, like, "What are you doing? They're just kids." And he kept repeating that to himself over and over. And I had a really kind of like in-depth 2-hour interview with him shortly, like a week after his arrest, where we got into all of these details and just kind of like seeing it from his perspective, the harrowing experience of like, you're a professor, you're teaching students like these every day, and also a father with children this age. It was just kind of like so many emotions that he was going through. And I got to see that with him through that interview. And that was kind of like the first interview I had where someone kind of like cried during it. And it kind of like really brought me to consider like, how do I handle this sort of thing? Like we're always talking about like you want to make sure your source is comfortable, but what do you do when a source is like so overwhelmed with emotions like this? And it kind of like brought me back to some like trauma-informed journalism work that I had done earlier that semester at the CMA conference. And it just kind of like really kind of like reinforced to me that like the people we talk to, they're going through so much depending on what stories we're telling. And those are stories that might be brushed under the side. The way that Fox News had presented his story was that it was a violent brown man attacking the police. And then when we were talking to him, he was being assaulted by the police officers and had video proof of it. And it was just like this crazy thing where it could have so very easily been like a demonizing of him if we just kind of like gave into the bandwagon. But by like talking to him, we were able to find out so much more about this story, and it's kind of like left this lasting impact on me.
Yeah, these are really good examples. I just wanted to quickly shout out some of the work of our photo editor, Henry. During the spring, during the encampments, like he and a bunch of other photo editors from different, newspapers, from UCLA, from UC Berkeley, places like that, all put together like a photo essay showing the different scenes of, those campuses. And you could see a lot of the parallels and a lot of the, unique aspects of the different universities. And I thought that was a really impactful, and we shared it on social media too. It's a really impactful way to show like what was happening again. Like it's our job to, spotlight what is going on. And then there was another one we did, I think the previous semester, which was just like 1 hour on each campus. And you can see like some campuses are like bare because it's like 9 a.m. or something, or 6 a.m. And other campuses, there's a lot of students bustling, and you see like one school has like a meat building or something, and another school has, other aspects. And I really appreciate those stories because from like a photo lens and like from a visual lens, you can see what are the parallels and what are the differences of different universities.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great point. This next question is from my former college advisor, Michael Koretsky. Michael would like to know, what would you tell student editors who are fearful of speaking truth to power? That it might jeopardize their careers, be a permanent stain on their employment record? So who would like to start there?
I can answer this as someone who is sending emails this morning about my effort to get my charges expunged, um, which is still up in the air. I don't know. I think that it sort of comes with the territory, and it comes with the career in a way. I mean, I think part of being a good journalist is being someone who's willing to put yourself on the line, and you need to put yourself on the line if you're gonna do truthful and good reporting. Like if Dre and I hadn't been there that night, like there wouldn't have been anyone from the D covering the arrests. And before I was standing there, my editor-in-chief said to me, like, you could get arrested, and put her phone number on my arm, which I actually used to call her when I was in the jail cell. But yeah, I mean, you have to make those sorts of decisions if you want to do truthful reporting. And also, I don't know, I think that in this career there are a lot of people who recognize that, who have had similar experiences because they know that this is the reality of journalism.
Gregorio, your hand's up.
I guess I also wanted to add on a bit to that, just kind of like echoing Charlotte's point of like it is just part of the job. But like when it comes to like a fear of it jeopardizing your career, I don't really think that anyone's gonna look at you speaking truth to power as a negative. And like in my own experience, like yes, I got fired from my job as the editor-in-chief of the Mercury. That fully just skyrocketed my career when it came to doing like journalism, because now I've written for things like the Dallas Observer, which is one of the biggest newspapers in Dallas. And it's just this sort of thing where it's like I've gotten to network with lawyers and journalists all over the country. I've done so many things that I wouldn't have done if I was just the editor in chief of the Mercury. And it's this sort of thing where if you're willing to just kind of like let things slide over, you'll do it, you'll get that kind of thing on your resume. But if you're willing to put yourself on the line to speak truth to power, there are other people who support that kind of work ethic who will see that as a net positive and will support you in that. You'll find a bunch of new doors opening, even if the doors on campus might close a bit.
I'm going to jump to another question, if that's okay, Nathan. I know I'm cutting you off. Thank you. And this is from Trisha Folks Kelly. I'm an advisor who has some students who are petrified of making mistakes, so they're adverse to taking risks in their reporting. What advice do you have for other student journalists who could do deeper work but are just scared?
I can jump in really quickly. That
Please.
depends on, I guess what their network is. At the DT, we're fortunate enough to have like a copy desk who, rigorously fact checks everything. But, as we know, a lot of newspapers, don't have that. But you can still take a lot of those similar techniques and ideas into your reporting. I would say, start with your reporting, be, sensitive and deliberate in what you're doing, but as you're going through the process, kind of go line by line and make sure things are like linked. Like one thing we always do is if you have a Google Doc, you make a comment and you put the link and make sure it's a reputable source. So you kind of just go through and just go line by line and really scrutinize, like, how do I know this is true? Am I referencing like a authoritative source, or is it just hearsay? And again, if you don't have a copy desk, like still maybe try and have someone, whether it's your advisor or, another student editor who you can bounce ideas off of and just challenge the rigor of your own reporting. I think there's a lot, I think there's a lot of stuff that you can still take from that idea of just journalism as a process of verification.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I would also just add that I've never been mad at a reporter coming to me and being like, oh, I'm looking into this. Ah, sorry, it was a dead end. Like, it's nothing. Like, there's nothing wrong with pre-reporting. And I would rather someone do some pre-reporting and see if something is worth pulling the thread at, rather than just not looking into it at all and leaving that stone covered. I'm going to try and jam in one more question. Nicholas Coral is asking, looking forward, what do you see as the future with these threats to student journalism? Is the future hopeful, or what further changes do you expect?
I mean, I think this is a great question, but it's also something that I think is sort of unanswered by the entire industry right now. Like, I think the greatest threats to student journalism are the greatest threats as well to national media organizations. The switch to the digital landscape is something that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal don't understand how to navigate. What comes with the death of print newspapers, what comes with the rise of these massive media conglomerations that are controlling the way information is passed between people, what comes from our reliance on social media for political discourse. Like, I don't know. And I think that even people at the top of the field would have difficulty really making sense of that.
I think that's a very fair response to a good question. Okay, I'm going to kick it back over to Mike.
Terrific discussion. Thank you all so much. Back to the whole bravery thing. I will say, having counseled students that have faced subpoenas and things like that, it's sometimes the best job boost that you'll ever get. I mean, the folks that are, they really are. It's a pushing back is a way of life. I remember I've gotten to know Mary Beth Tinker of the Tinker case very well, and she talks about pushing back is being active is a way of life, and I think that we're seeing that in student journalists in particular. Student journalists move toward the news. I mean, that's just the thing. I mean, we during the May protests when the police came, Charlotte talks about that moment, where you have to decide, are you going to kind of fall back in, or are you going to Are you going to get into it? Are you going to get involved? And thankfully, we do have young people that are willing to get involved, that are willing to, give us their perspective. I mean, my goodness, right now at this moment in time, I mean, your perspective is so important. Nobody is more impacted by what the heck is going on right now than you. And having you speak out about it and let others know, what's going on, how you feel about it, how your classmates feel about it. So very, very important and so brave right now. So thank you all very much. I just want to get back to this. We are doing this for Student Press Freedom Day, so I encourage you all. I think Josh has has another slide here about Student Press Freedom Day. So the new events that are going to be coming up. We've got lots and lots of events coming up. You can go to our website again, splc.org. Has a lot more information about that. And I encourage you. And one of the things too about being brave, I mean, I do hope that one of the opportunities that we can provide at the Student Press Law Center is information. I mean, where you have information, sometimes that's what you need to do the brave reporting. Knowing what libel is and what libel isn't. Knowing how to get records and how how you can do the sourcing that you need to put out the reporting and the news that you need to is hopefully part of what we do here. So, but gosh, we need folks like you all for to actually be out there on the front line. So thank you all very much for sharing your piece of the pie with everybody today. And yeah, I appreciate it. And Emily, thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.